My name is David Smith. I'm going to present constitutional rights within disaster policies. Disasters, when they occur, result in erratic, sometimes irrational behavior that can and often does challenge basic fundamental rights that the Constitution provides. It is therefore very imperative to thoroughly understand these constitutional rights so they are institutionalized in all disaster plans and policies. We will start with a review of all applicable sections and amendments of the Constitution, starting with Article 1. I will also cover 6 of the 25 constitutional amendments. Additionally, I will cover two other acts. Although not part of the Constitution, they stem from the Constitution's intent. These acts are both the Posse Comitatus Act and the Insurrection Act. Throughout time, there have been numerous constitutional violations during disasters. Most often we see these during large disasters, however, not always, as you will see when I discuss the case in Sampson, Alabama. Fortunately, we learn from these mistakes. Two notable guides that put some of these lessons learned into action are written by the American Bar Association as well as the Interagency Standing Committee. Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution has many stipulations. One that is very important and internalized for emergency management purposes is that the federal funds should only be used for general welfare use and not just for one particular group. Section 9 identifies habeas corpus, which translates to a person's right to appear before a judge before being imprisoned. The Constitution states that suspension of habeas corpus can only be done in cases of rebellion or invasion whereby the public safety may require it. This is important to understand as we discuss the meaning of martial law. Now we get to the most familiar amendments. The First Amendment, the freedom of speech and press. We should respect the freedom of speech tremendously as emergency managers. It provides a means by which to understand the concerns of the public and truly gauge what is going on during the milling and rumor stage. The freedom of press gives us a chance to get our message out so we can effectively communicate and collaborate with the press. The Second Amendment, the right to bear arms. In recent times we've seen these rights infringed upon because of the violence that guns have brought to police. Nonetheless, this right should be sacrosanct. The right to bear arms is also preventative in nature as well. Law enforcement personnel cannot deter by themselves the large number of threats that are present during a disaster. In fact, when citizens are armed and their rights to defend themselves are well advocated, the looting and the crime that ensues during a disaster can quickly be muted. The Fifth Amendment is relevant to disaster planning on two aspects. Not only the right to due process, but it also addresses the use of private property. During disasters, we've seen sporting events, Walmarts, other large venues used to both gather victims and to distribute aid. They must be compensated for. The Sixth Amendment is the right to a speedy trial. When a disaster occurs, the legal system cannot be put on hold, so those jailed during a disaster must still be offered this right. Thus, disaster planning must capture the need to have licensed lawyers, judges, jury members available to ensure the legal system continues to function. The 10th Amendment is absolutely fundamental to disaster policy. We have this amendment to thank for the bottom-up design to our national response framework. Disaster planning and policy must continue to stress the importance of state sovereignty and state rights. The 14th Amendment provides the right to equal protection by the law, also known as the Equal Rights Amendment. Response efforts during disasters must approach the needs of the entire public and not just one group. Two other acts that spill over from the Constitution are the Insurrection Act and the Posse Comitatus Act, both of which are designed to limit the President's ability to enact martial law. The Insurrection Act allows the President to deploy troops to put down lawlessness, insurrection, or rebellion only when all local and state resources have been utilized. Additionally, the Posse Comitatus Act states that federal forces may not be used for civil law enforcement measures unless approved by an act of Congress. Both of these acts work together to ensure we don't end up in a state of martial law unnecessarily. Martial law would suspend all the constitutional rights whereby military calls the shots to establish the peace. There have been a few instances in our country's history whereby we've enacted martial law. Although very effective at squelching the problems, it comes at a cost to the civil liberties that are lost. As mentioned earlier, in spite of best intentions, violations do occur. During the Civil War, President Lincoln suspended habeas corpus. Martial law was instituted, and those voicing their opinions as anything but loyal were arrested and jailed without trial. The internment of Japanese Americans during World War II violated the Fifth Amendment by depriving due process. Hurricane Katrina, we saw gun confiscation from citizens seeking to defend themselves and their properties from looters. A much smaller incident was the improper use of federal forces during the murder spree that took place in Sampson, Alabama in 2009. Although good intentioned, Armed federal troops being used for civil law enforcement is against the intent of the Constitution. Fortunately, when violations occur, we often learn lessons from them. The American Bar Association has published The Rule of Law During Disaster, and the Interagency Standing Committee has published Human Rights and Natural Disasters, in hopes that the guiding principles of these documents are endorsed at all levels of disaster planning. Today I've covered the applicable sections of the Constitution, other legal implications, some violations that have occurred, and a couple of notable guides to prevent future violations. I hope you've enjoyed the presentation, but most importantly, I hope I offered you some good information. I look forward to your comments and questions.